welcome to the Connect interview series at Enlit Europe. I'm John Engel, and I'm so happy to be joined today by Axel Thiemann. He is the CEO at Sonnedix, a renewable energy producer with 8 gigawatts of control capacity in 10 countries, and we have so much to talk about today. Axel, please join me. How are you? Great to see you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Great to be
thanks
here.
for being here. Well, Axel, we obviously have plenty to talk about today, and I think an interesting moment to discuss with you, given Sonnedix's broad exposure to a global market. We just emerged, we feel like we emerged from the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, kind of.
Kind of. But we didn't get much relief. Immediately thrown into supply chain constraints, geopolitical strife with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, all of these dueling conflicts that a platform like yours has to deal with. How do you, as a leader of a renewable energy producer of Sonnedix's size, navigate those headwinds and make sure that you stay nimble for such a changing environment?
Well, if you put it like that, actually I should ask myself, am I in the right business? If you put it like that. No, it's true. I think we are in a situation where we have unprecedented, and I think that's a word that has been probably overused, throughout the pandemic, but we are really in unprecedented circumstances, and you mentioned some of this. So we have inflation, we have supply chain tightness, which is, I think, still partially linked to COVID. We have interest rate increases, volatility. We have, driven to a certain extent by the Ukraine-Russia war, we have the energy price volatility, particularly in Europe. And we have regulatory activity with a velocity that we haven't seen in the energy space. A lot of short-term problems, but I do think in the long run, I think we are in a very, very special and actually a very good place. So one of the things that I do every year, that I think it's fun, it's a little nerdy, but it's fun, is I compare the forecasts from last year to this year. And
that is nerdy.
That is nerdy, yeah. Thank you for that. But we're in an industry that's very fortunate, not just that we're growing, but actually that the growth forecasts jump up every year. And this year has seen the biggest jump that I can remember. So I think in the long term, we are in a very good place. We are sustainable, we are cost competitive, and we have seen a real mindset change with regards to renewables. Because the sustainability has become to the forefront, and also because there's a realization that it can kind of contribute to energy independence. But what we are doing, particularly in this current situation, is really navigating the short term very, very carefully. And maybe a couple of words about Sonnedix. So we have roughly 800 million run rate revenue. We are in 10 countries. 85% of that is contracted. We are planning to build more than 1 gigawatt next year. So we are coming from a very stable place. It's a lucky situation to have. But what we're doing right now to deal with that is really navigating and choreographing the growth very carefully, because I believe all these challenges in the long run will play out. We are the low-cost producer. If interest rates increase, if CapEx increases, we're still the low-cost producer. What we need to do is just make sure that we contract at the right price. And I believe in the long run, this is all a pass-through, because no matter what happens on the cost side, we will still be low cost, and PPA prices will adjust in the medium term. In the short term, there's obviously the risk that we have a crunch, that we overcommit to delivery at a certain price that is difficult to keep. So choreographing that when we contract, when we start construction, and when we financing, that's really the difficult part. And that's where we are putting a lot of effort to make sure that we keep our risk profile, our capital at risk in the growth space really tightly controlled. But given that, I'm confident that we manage that, and that we see the medium term very, very positive.
Anyone who knows your background previously in finance before coming into renewable energy will not then be surprised that you compare forecasts for fun, that is your pastime.
Yes, thank you. I also have other things that I do for fun.
You have other hobbies. Yeah, we'll discuss those later, maybe, if we have time. So, Axel, then what are some of the biggest challenges that you are facing as a platform? We talked about how you navigate these macro trends and how you follow the market and try to stay nimble. But what are those near-term risks that you mentioned, and how are you dealing with those?
So I think that the challenges that we have right now, if I look at the short term, Number one is people. So all this, you know, choreographing that I described, you know, it's not something that, you know, happens naturally. So what we're building is not that complicated. You know, it's steel, it's copper, it's glass, it's silicone that we're putting somewhere in an efficient way. But it's all about people that make that happen, that navigate these challenges. And access to talent is really the key thing that I'm worried about in the short term. Together with two other things. One is regulatory certainty. So the energy crisis requires protection of end customers. There's no doubt about it. But what creates an issue for players like us is uncertainty, so frequently changing regulation. What we need is certainty so that we can plan and that we can deploy with confidence. And navigating that in the current environment, that has been a challenge. The other thing is permitting. We're seeing goals increase on a European level, on a national level, in the US. That is not necessarily matched by the ability to develop, to permit these projects on the ground. A lot of that is driven by local decisions, municipal decisions, and we're seeing capacity shortages. There's a lot of development that needs to be handled that is difficult. We see a little bit more of this not in my backyard attitudes, and what we are really looking for is certainty also on the development permitting front, so that the national goals get translated in development policy to allow us to really deploy at speed to help the energy transition and also energy independence.
We are fresh off of COP27, so I think it's a prudent time to frame where we stand from a policymaker standpoint of commitments and ambitions to reach these goals that we know we need to reach in a very short amount of time, with what you are seeing on the ground floor as a developer taking forth these projects and carrying them out, and the doers, as I call you. Is there a chasm? Is there some separation between the goals that we hear in the press conferences and read in the press releases versus the reality that you see day to day, and do you see any issues there?
Yes, very, very succinctly. So, well, another part of the charts that I look at, you know, as part of my hobbies, there's this kind of greenhouse gas emissions curve that's needed to deliver the 1.5, and that has become nearly vertical over the last couple of years. So, it's clear that the change that we're seeing is not fast enough because the goals get ever more challenging to change it. So I do believe we have a issue. Now, that is not only the power sector, you know, it's power, transportation, it's industries, agriculture. There are a lot of moving pieces. Now, what I can talk to is really the power sector. And again, what I see there is we have, I think, the technical ability, we have the funding to deploy more, but we are not necessarily able to. I think there is good intent, but what is short is the ability to develop, as I said before. Those are the things that really on the ground are holding us down. And the other issue that is a short-term / medium-term issue, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, is as these grids, as we electrify more, as the grids become more renewable energy dominated, we need to provide for flexibility and grid balancing, and for something that has previously come from conventional. And in most jurisdictions right now, there are no regulatory mechanisms for that. We don't have mechanisms that remunerate players for providing flexibility, that essentially allows storage to be deployed at scale. And that is the big next challenge, I think, that we need if we really want to make a step change in renewables. And I do believe, you know, it can be done, but it really requires concerted action.
And urgency.
Yeah, urgency, because, as you said, well, the press conferences are easy. It's easy to put goals up. It's not that easy to actually deliver on these goals on the ground.
We've been talking about a lot of the challenges and the headwinds and maybe more of the negative byproduct of the business. What excites you most, and what are some of these markets that you are eyeing as having the greatest potential moving forward in these near and long-term scenarios?
Well, I think, as I said in the very beginning, I think we are in the right sector at the right time. I think it's a very, very exciting space. There is a lot of growth potential. I believe there is a real mindset shift. I mean, when we started, everything was subsidized, right? We could not compete. We could only build renewables because somebody decided to make it happen. Now we are competing with conventional successfully. So I think this is actually, a tremendous success story. We need to go faster, no doubt about it. Now, what I'm particularly excited about is the this mindset shift, so the openness on the political and regulatory side to talk about it. I think it needs to be converted into action. I do believe that the mindset shift also among off-takers has happened. So there's now real demand. We see a whole new class of off-takers interested in renewables. That is really great. It's not just policy, it's actually the users that want to go there. And the markets that I'm particularly interested in right now, well, we are in Germany. I'm German, so I think Germany, I think Germany is a really really exciting space. Not easy, it's a big challenge. Where we have load centers, where we have the ability to deploy, permitting the same issues, but it has scale, and also I believe there's a willingness. And I believe the US with the IRA has enormous potential. It's not one market, it's 50. Some of them are more friendly, some of them are less friendly. But I do believe the IRA has not just created a longer-term runway, but the other aspect of the IRA is really the industrial policy to rehouse some parts of the supply chain, because that I think is very important if you look at the growth trajectory and the scale of growth that we need. Right now we're very dependent on Southeast Asia. Rehousing that in the US and ideally also in some parts of Europe is very, very important.
Square that with what we're seeing in Europe. You mentioned the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. It was not only the first meaningful step of climate action in the US where I live, but it was also the first meaningful industrial policy in generations for the country. With what you're seeing in Europe now, given the countries that have prioritized industrial policy, what do you need to see from the EU to make sure that there is momentum there to keep up in a similar way?
I think, maybe it's a little bit harsh to say, but I think Europe does not have right now a coherent industrial policy to take charge of some of the supply chains. I think most of that, there was a very active and to a certain extent dominant supply chain in the early 2010s. That has all moved away. And right now, there is very little activity at least on the solar side, to move that back in. I think that would be an important goal. If you look at the pipeline, if you look at the ambition to allow to really deliver that with confidence and not be reliant purely on a global supply chain.
I think one of the takeaways from the Inflation Reduction Act in the US also is that it's never too late, and that we didn't expect to see that in the US, a meaningful climate action and also industrial policy. It came out of seemingly thin air, but now it feels like the dawn of a new age. And that is something that Europe can realize as well.
Yeah.
It is not behind the 8 ball and lost that opportunity. Yeah. There is still time.
There's time. And I think the mindset shift in Europe in the last year, for very sad reasons for the Ukraine, Russia, has been, really momentous. So I agree. It's not too late, and I think there is willingness to make things happen.
Axel Thiemann, CEO of Sonnedix, thanks for joining me.
John, thanks a lot. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us at Enlit Europe in Frankfurt, Germany. And for more on the Connect interview series, please go to enlit.world.